One of my colleagues on the SIEPR board and one of the sponsors of the summit, Martin Koffel, is the chairman and CEO of URS Corporation, and he will now introduce our next session.
Well, thank you. CEOs usually are fairly harsh on each other, but I must say today's panel is going to make it very easy to make the introductions. We saw before the break that the debate continues. But I must say that the debate at SIEPR about public policy is a lot more civil than the debate in Washington, and what a pleasure it is to see it here. But as a businessman, I must say that after almost 5 years of really strident public policy debate, we still have a tax regime that actually punishes the very private sector behavior that we need to restart the economy. We have an intrusive regulatory culture that seems in some respects, and I say this slightly tongue-in-cheek, based on some Soviet-era concepts. And I think prominently it's based on one Russian word, niet, or no, and that seems to be the regime. We have an obvious love affair with Keynesian stimulus spending, and parallel to that we've got this huge government transfer of public money to bail out financial institutions and manufacturing corporations. During the years of the crisis, there was $1 billion of public money transferred to bail out corporations. You know, that $1 billion is 25 times greater than the new capital formation from IPOs in 2011. Staggering ratio, back to front, if we're trying to, in fact, fix this economy. And we all know that we have an economy that is not creating growth, not creating wealth, and it's just not fun for anyone. But fortunately, there are some exceptions, and they're sitting here today. And we have 3 people who have a lifetime of brilliantly executing ideas, creating jobs, and creating value for their investors, and in the process, building the tax base. John Chauvin, of course, the director of SIEPR, is our moderator this morning. John Martin is chairman and CEO of Gilead Sciences. He's a leading antiviral chemistry researcher in his own right, as well as being CEO. And he's focused Gilead on products that treat HCV, HIV, cardiovascular, and respiratory disorders. In the process, he's built an $8 billion Fortune 500 and created something of great value to society, to healthcare and everyone involved in it, and to his own stockholders. Now, I actually don't know how to introduce Meg Whitman. Certainly, I don't know how to do it in a way that does justice to everything that Meg has done. Meg has added her creativity and value to 8 companies, every one of which is a household word. I won't take time up on it. Obviously, including leading eBay from a company with $4 million of revenue when she came to $8 billion when she departed. She's now turning around HP, which is, I think, one of the treasures of the California economy. And finally, I know Meg's moved on, but I think it has to be said, and it has to be said as a tribute to her, that Meg had a real plan to turn around California itself. And she came awfully close to doing it. And I can't imagine a CEO more qualified to discuss today's economy than Meg. So this is going to be a very interesting session. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. This is going to be fun. I should say just one thing about my qualifications for being here is I've been involved with companies for about 20 years or longer, and one company I'm quite involved with is Cadence Design Systems, and our CEO is right over here, Lip Bhutan, and the only reason I mention that is in Singapore, he was just named on an international basis the CEO of the year, so I thought that was pretty good. So Lip Bhu, congratulations. Now for the panel, I thought we'd kind of play it like this. I think I want to give Meg Whitman, John Martin, chance to just kind of say what's on their mind in brief opening remarks. And then I'll ask them a series of questions, and I'm honestly known for my softballs. And then we'll turn it over to you, and I know that the SIEPR audience is pretty good at the curveball. So, but anyway, you've got a turn. You should be thinking about what questions you'd like to ask Meg and John. They do represent two of the leading companies, certainly headquartered in the Bay Area, and really two of the great companies in the world. But Meg, why don't you start off and just tell us a little bit what's on your mind, and we'll get to some questions in a minute.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I am just delighted to be here again at the SIEPR conference. You all do a remarkable job, and I want to thank you for putting on this event, because it actually shaped my thinking when I first came, 10 years ago, so thank you for that. What's on my mind 100% of the time right now is Hewlett-Packard. It is a wonderful company that has had challenges, in the past number of years. But it is a remarkable gem of Silicon Valley, of California, of the United States, and frankly, the world. It is an enormous company. We have $127 billion of revenue, 5 major lines of business, 320,000 employees, and 80,000 contractors. And we do business in 166 countries around the world through our direct sales force, as well as 200,000 partners who help distribute HP gear. And I think you could buy HP gear just about everywhere. Probably at the base camp of Everest, there is a distributor or a partner who can help you out. It is, as I said, just a gem of Silicon Valley, and the bones are incredibly good of this company. One of the first observations I had is how hard it is to kill founder DNA. Bill and Dave's core values, core DNA is still very much alive at HP. In some cases, it's just embers, and we're trying to do a little, getting those embers going again. But the core values of the company are terrific, and we're just trying to lead a transformation, if you will, of this company to get back to its roots of an engineering-driven culture, of an innovation-driven culture that is deeply customer-focused. And I think we've got a very good shot at doing that. The challenges are understandable. And I think we have a plan to get there. But it took us a while to get into this situation. It's going to take us a little while to get out. And from a personal perspective, I have to say that having run for office has stood me in very good stead to run this company, because nothing bothers me. I mean, it is actually quite hilarious, because every day there's some crisis somewhere, there's some big challenge, there's some change in financial situation or whatever. And my executive team has gotten quite used to me saying, okay, we'll work it out. Because really, I was toughened up very much by the campaign trail. And and it actually has stood me in very good stead. I'll also make one other comment, which is that HP is the size of a small city. And so it is not only what you say, it is what you do, and the symbolic value of your actions when you are trying to change a culture or evolve a culture as big as HP. Just to touch a few minutes on sort of the global economy. Right now, our attempts to turn around HP are, I would say, not being helped by the global economy. I'll start with Europe. We remain terribly concerned about Europe. If you look past what has happened over the last 10 years, when the EU, when a lot of the more unsteady economies joined the EU, they were able to borrow at rates that were more commensurate with much more established and less risky economies. So in some ways, the implicit guarantee of European sovereign debt really created, in my view, a moral hazard that for many years, they were able to borrow at rates that were not, as I said, commensurate with actual real risk in the economy. All that is now coming home to roost. And our view is that we don't think the European economy is getting better. In fact, we think there is a very good chance this falls right into a really quite significant recession that then potentially has a contagion to the U.S. So we're quite concerned about Europe and are positioning ourselves appropriately in that regard. Asia, we remain optimistic. We can see the growth rates slowing down in some of the big countries like China and Indonesia. and India. But we remain very bullish about this market because they are, just at the beginning of the technology explosion, the personal computing device explosion that we saw in the more developed world. So we're investing heavily in those markets. We've got challenges in all of them, but are investing heavily. And then here in the U.S., and I still believe the U.S. has to be incredibly healthy for companies like HP to be healthy. And I sort of feel like the economy is sputtering along, that we have not seen a major uplift. I don't think it's getting worse, but I don't think it's getting better at the rate that we would certainly like to see. And I think if you look at the economist data, what you'll see is this has taken an extraordinarily long time, perhaps the longest time to come out of a recession since the Great Depression. So again, I remain, very optimistic about what we can do with HP, but we are not being helped by the global macroeconomic environment. So I think that's probably enough to start off and turn it over to John.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, John. I want to echo what Meg said about how much I enjoy coming to the summit. It's not only informative, but I can give a specific example. After one meeting, I went back to Foster City and changed our 401k from opt-in to opt-out, and the total employee participation rate went up just like that, 20%. It was really beneficial. So I represent, it's interesting, we have the technology industry and biomedical, which are huge employers in California and in the Bay Area. The industry I represent has a lot of challenges. I do want to say the positive thing is over the last several decades, the biotech and pharmaceutical industry has changed people's lives in terms of living longer and healthier lives. There's a lot of reasons we're under siege now, not just the world economy or trying to get paid or things like that, but also what was talked about earlier in terms of the growing cost of medical care. If you ask an American member of the public, and probably most people in this room, people think drugs account for about 50% of healthcare expenditure. It's more like 12%, but that includes generic drugs. If it's just branded drugs still on patent, it's only 6% of overall healthcare. And so it's not a big part of the problem, and there's also not a lot of savings to have there by controls. Nevertheless, the whole industry is suffering from various types of afflictions. Large pharmaceutical companies have not been innovative enough to replace the products, their biggest products that are expiring on patents over the last few years and the next few years. And they also are very large organizations and are going through pretty significant downsizing. The smaller companies, of which there's over 2,300 in California, if you include diagnostic and device, 75% of them, to back up, California Healthcare Institute, along with PwC and Bay Bio, just put out their annual report. And in the report, 75% of the companies said they had to slow projects this year for lack of access to capital or regulatory restraints on what they're able to do. And it's very difficult for a small company to grow to be like Gilead now. Gilead sort of found the sweet spot of 25 years ago where we've seen several cycles with access to capital. We went public 20 years ago in 1992 in a time where it was quite easy to go public. We went public without even having any product in human clinical studies, which is pretty much impossible today. We did not earn a profit until 10 years ago, 2002. During this period of time, 15 years, we had access to capital, and as you know, there's just tremendous scientific innovations going on in medicine today and has been over the last couple decades. During that 15 years, we spent about $2 billion, and our retained earnings were negative $750 million. I don't think small companies can envision doing that today. We also, as we built the company, decide we're going to have professional athletes internally, but create most of our jobs externally. We do almost all the manufacturing externally, for instance. So we've created a lot more jobs outside the company than we have inside the company, but it contributes to a healthy growth of the economy anyway. The bigger companies that want to get to our model have a hard time doing it because of the infrastructure already built in. So, for instance, we sell products in China. Two drugs in China. China's been subject to a lot of discussion. Two drugs, We do a lot of manufacturing in China. We source a lot of raw materials from China. We have 12 research partnerships with Chinese companies. We have one person based in China. That's all we have. Our whole company of 4,500 people, most of the big pharmaceutical companies have at least that many people based in China. So we have a very different model of working through other organizations as we built the company, and it's given us a lot of flexibility and control of resources. You can see for a big company that has a lot of infrastructure, so they're losing products, they would have to be thinking about how to redo their model. For us being in this fortunate spot where the smaller companies have a difficult time realizing their dreams, allows us to take a broad scientific view, and we have actually acquired a number of small companies and work in partnership with many companies. So for my company in specific that I work for, we're very optimistic about the future, but there's a big shakeout going in the industry now.
So, kind of to set up my first question, I imagine a lot of you have read Steve Jobs' biography that's been essentially a bestseller the last few months, and that caused me to think about if you could help us understand your style of leadership and decisive leadership, which Steve displayed at Apple. And I know both of you have had some opportunities for decisive actions recently. Meg is still in the early months at HP, and she quickly had to look at the strategic options for the company and decide whether to reverse her predecessor's decision of getting out of the PC business or not, and she made that decision, and that it didn't have the luxury of a lot of time to do that. And John, Gilead recently completed a rather large $11 billion merger with Pharmasset, a company with very little revenue, but with a promising treatment for hepatitis C, if I'm not mistaken. And that takes a certain amount of decisive leadership to make that call. And but I just wanted to, each of you maybe to expand on how do you see the role of a CEO, and when do you stop deliberations and when do you make the call? I'll start with Meg.
Well, I'd say a couple of things. My overall philosophy of leadership is be very clear about the direction that the company must go in. And how you sort that out, I think, depends dramatically on the culture of the company, the size of the company. And so what I did is immediately enlist the support, the input of the senior team at HP, many of whom are quite experienced, but some have joined the company quite recently. And I'm a big believer that if you're going to go out and play Olympic-style basketball, you better have thrown the basketball around a bit. And HP historically, at least for the last 5 or 6 years, has been run in very intact business unit silos, where the business unit heads didn't have much interaction with each other. And I changed that immediately and basically said we collectively as the senior team have got to get input, and then we've got to decide what we want to do. And so my view is the first thing is, what are you going to do? What is the strategic direction of the company? And I think strategy is all about the art of exclusion. What are you not going to do? And at HP, there's a million ideas about what this company could be. We have to hone in and decide quite quickly what we were going to focus on. The next big philosophy that I have about leadership is the right person in the right job at the right time with the right attitude who wants to sign up for the journey. And so I've been very clear about organizing and getting the right person in the right job at HP with the right attitude who understands what we're about to embark on here. This will not be a journey for the faint of heart, and we need to have everyone, committed to taking this journey. I think the other thing that we've decided is innovation is the lifeblood of this company, and we are going to have to invest more money in R&D. Over the last several years, R&D has been cut back, because when you're in trouble, the easiest place to go is R&D. It is the worst possible place to go. And my view is, listen, the investment, the financial commitment to R&D is a necessary but not sufficient condition. To have a great innovative company, you've got to do more than just invest, but you have to invest enough to make the real difference. So I've tried to focus on doing a small number of things very well, a very crisp communication, And that communication is not only what we say, as I said, it is what I do. And we have gotten tremendous understanding of our 320,000 employees by one simple act, which I underestimated its impact. But we moved the HP senior executives out of the wood-paneled private offices in the executive suite where you actually had to go by a guard to get in, to cubicles. We took apart the executive parking lot, took down the commando fence and the barbed wire, and opened this up. And it's really quite remarkable because it is symbolic of the kind of company we want to become, which is there are good ideas everywhere, we are accessible, we are trying to take the hierarchy out of this company. And so it's just been interesting to see the few symbolic things that you can do that actually telegraph to 320,000 people what it is you're trying to accomplish. So, short answer to philosophy of leadership. I will say, I think there's lots of ways to skin a cat here. There is no one, CEO manual, here's how you do it, turn to chapter 1, page 1, paragraph 1. I think you have to build on your personality, you have to build on your experiences, you have to understand the culture of the company. And I have to say, I think Steve Jobs was perhaps the business genius of our generation. This is was a remarkable individual who did some remarkable things, not only at Apple, but at Pixar and other places. So I think there's many ways to skin a cat, and you've got to sort of decide for yourself what fits with you, because trying to be someone else will never work in a situation I think that, John and I find ourselves in.
Yep, agreed with all of that. Gilead discovers, develops, and commercializes drugs for unmet medical needs, and all parts of that involve scientific innovation. People often think when a drug's launched onto the market, that's it, you're done, and it's just sold. In fact, there's a lot more money spent on clinical research on a drug once it's approved to better understand its profile, to make sure it can be used in maybe additional indications, or understand the safety for taking it as a chronic disease. So science is the big thing for us. Another important thing to think about is Gilead's expense on R&D is far less than 1% of the industry expense, yet the FDA approves only 20 new chemical entities or less every year. So statistically, you can't get there if your mindset is internal R&D only. So we have a view that we don't care where the molecule comes from. We want to have best-in-class molecules for particular disease indications. And that's led us to do, as I indicated earlier, acquisitions and partnerships to bring stuff forward. And a really good example is where we've been most successful so far is in the treatment of HIV and AIDS. Up till 1996, anyone who was diagnosed with HIV is a death sentence because we did not have enough drugs. It takes 3 drugs to control the virus. Starting in 1996, there were enough drugs, but the drugs were hard to take, toxic. People couldn't take all their medications. And if you don't take all your pills, you become resistant and then run out of drug classes. So that's why people still even die today. Starting in 2001, we launched a drug that was 1 pill once a day, well tolerated. We did the same thing in 2003. Then 2004, we combined them into 1 pill. So that's 2 drugs in 1 pill. We wanted to do a 3-drug pill because then it's all or nothing. Patients would be far less likely to develop resistance. To find a 3rd tolerated drug, we did a partnership with Bristol Myers and Merck, who had a drug, and we combined them all together and have really allowed that to take over the market. And in fact, 80% of patients today in the United States who are taking medications are on one of the Gilead medications. So that type of repeat scientific innovation, as we've gone through sort of the product cycles, is still ongoing. We launched a 2nd single tablet regimen last year. We'll be launching another one this year. And that epitomizes what we're doing in some other areas of the company too. But it really comes with the scientific focus of the management of the company each and every day to make sure we're making good decisions all throughout our business.
Meg, I had a couple, maybe I'll combine a couple of questions. You already covered a little bit how you can see the world economy through the HP lens, and Europe didn't look so great and so forth. I was going to ask, maybe I'll do one at a time. One question I was going to ask is, particularly in the U.S., you do a lot of business with business, and you do quite a bit of business with a customer, the ultimate customer. What's the relative strength of the consumer side of your business and the business side of your business?
Well, it varies by part of the world, but since you asked about the United States, we still see a fair amount of weakness in consumer demand. Notwithstanding, when you've got a great piece of technology like the iPad or the iPhone, you'll see some demand. But the consumer is relatively tepid. I sit also on the board of Procter & Gamble, and they're seeing the same thing. You see consumers concerned about the unemployment rate. What has happened here is since the unemployment rate has not really come down, even those people who have a job are worried they may lose that job, and as a result don't have the confidence to spend in the way that we saw, in the more robust times of this economy. And since about, the economists in the audience will know, but I think the U.S. economy is about 60 or 70% consumer driven. So when the consumer is not confident, most of the products they buy come from businesses, which means businesses are not as confident as well. So I think you see almost a frozen nature to really invest in capital spending or hire people. Now, I think we're seeing little pickups here and there, but it is not, as I said, the robust recovery that one would have expected, being now 3 years on the other side of sort of the official end of the recession. So I think, these are all intertwined, but when you don't have a confident consumer in America, it's hard to have a confident business side.
Well, I thought, this is maybe not quite the softball, I promise, but what I thought
Remember, I ran for public office. I'm good with this.
I thought it was really questionable strategy to have a huge unit that you announce is for sale when you don't have a buyer in the wings. I mean, you just think if you're like, there aren't very many potential buyers for something as big as HP's PC business.
Yeah. Well,
that struck me as, boy, it puts you in a tough bargaining position when you've already announced it's for sale.
So the notion was actually probably not ever to sell the company. The notion was potentially to spin off the PC business as a separate company. And the reason that the board decided to announce that it was doing this is that up until quite recently, HP had lots of leaks. The company had sort of taken leaking to a new art form. And, and actually my view of that is a sign of a sick company. That's a sign of unhappy employees who wish the company ill in a way to sort of strike back. And actually what you've seen almost now from within a month of sort of a change of the guard, you have seen that decrease dramatically because we're having a better dialogue. So the decision was made, should we, let's go out and evaluate whether or not we should spin the PC business. And oh, by the way, this had worked once before with Agilent. And I see Ned Barnholt sitting in the audience who spent his career at HP, and it was a very successful spin. But the minute that we got a chance to get into this, and I launched what HP does better than anyone else, which are project management offices, where you can get people from all over the company 100% dedicated to something. No one does this any better than HP, I promise you. And within 4 weeks, it was very clear that this was, in fact, not the right thing to do. It is a $40 billion business where, up until very recently, HP was number one. And while the margins were not long, we make about 5 to 6% in the business. Because of the way we do the business, it's almost an infinite return on assets. I think it sounds a bit like how you do your business. Yeah. Since we own none of the manufacturing, this is an almost infinite ROI. So as a result, this is a business you actually like. And oh, by the way, it has enormous supply chain benefits for our industry standard server business, our storage business. And so it's not, you can't just look at it as an independent entity. Now, we said, what do we think the future of the PC business is? And my view is that the PC is very much alive and well. In some of the more developed markets, it's not growing fast, and there's a move to tablets and obviously smartphones. But in the developing world, there are many people who can't afford a tablet. And when they want real computing power, they buy a laptop or a desktop or a notebook. And of course, our workstations, we are number one in that business, which is a very good business for us that, for architects, for engineering firms, I mean, people are still buying workstations in a very major way. So it made all kinds of sense once we looked at it to keep this business. And I was with you. So we didn't have a lot of time to figure this out because the communications around that announcement was not perfect by any means. And as a result, we created a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace. And as every business leader will tell you, uncertainty is not our friend in business, whether it's uncertainty in the economy, uncertainty of where regulations are going, or uncertainty about what people think about what businesses you're in or not. So we made a very crisp and quick decision, and it was the right decision for HP. I've not looked back one day on it.
Well, not many people would be proud of creating a chronic disease, but Gilead Sciences should be proud of creating a chronic disease from a previously deadly disease, AIDS. And of course, we all know that AIDS is not primarily located in the United States. It's a worldwide problem, and unfortunately, it's a problem in many poor areas of the world, including Africa. And I thought I'd give John a chance to talk about the distribution of AIDS drugs in Africa and what the company's policies have been in that regard.
Yeah. Well, at least it's an area where we don't have to worry about slack in demand when the economy goes down because people have to take, it's life-saving medication. So, yeah, we did this over a period of time, evolved, and part of it is that we're a newer company. We don't have a lot of global infrastructure and work with partners. And we recognize that in the lowest income countries, we're not going to make a profit anyway. And so we divide the market into upper income, upper middle income, lower middle income, and low income, which is no profit. This was kind of like a grand experiment. Stanford had a role in setting this up because both George Schultz and John Kogan as board members participated. Nick Moore, who chairs our audit committee, is also on the board, and we have sort of the strong Bay Area presence that's very proud of what we've done in this instance. So we first made product available, no profit, in what we called our access markets, 132 countries, and nothing happened. Without, we don't have the infrastructure, and it just didn't really work. So what we did was enable Indian generics to manufacture our AIDS drug. And what that entailed was simply transferring the manufacturing process to them and having a contract for the low-income markets. They pay us what is now a 3% royalty because we have to do regulatory filings in all these countries. So over 50 countries in Africa need a regulatory filing. The European Union just needs one. Right. So there's a sort of a lot of barriers that we had not anticipated. So we transfer the process to an Indian generic, and then the U.S. government will approve through PEPFAR, the federal program that distributes drug to low-income countries, will approve the manufacturing process. If we directly transfer the process, it can be done in 5 months. If they try to do it on their own, it'd take maybe 24 months, and not really as much of a mechanism to get it done. And that's actually been a tremendous success. We now have 900,000 people on our main AIDS drug in upper income markets, and we have 2.2 million people on it in the 132 million low-income countries. So more than 2/3 of the people that are on this AIDS therapy are under access. That's from 5 years ago. There were only 30,000. So it's just a very rapid growth that put together this infrastructure. And to do the regulatory filings in medical education in these 132 countries, we have 13 distributors, and under them maybe another 40 or 50 sub-distributors that allow the whole mechanism to take place.
Okay. So I have a question now for both of you. After lunch, Jim Heckman is going to talk about the skills mismatch in the United States, which is related to, that we have a surplus of low-skilled workers and a shortage of scientists and engineers. But I was just going to ask you, are you experiencing difficulty in hiring Americans with the necessary skills to advance your companies? And related to that are the limitations on visas for talented foreigners to work in the United States affecting your companies. And Meg, I guess we'll start with you.
Okay. Yes and yes. So we have 87,500 employees in the United States and 16,000 in California. We're the second largest employer in California. And we have openings every day at HP in the United States that we can't fill because we don't have the pipeline of the most talented engineers that we need. And it's particularly challenging in Palo Alto and, you know, the Bay Area because there's so much competition for the great engineering talent. But I will say, even in places like Texas and Boise, Idaho, and Corvallis, Oregon, where we have big installations, and Herndon, Virginia, Alpharetta, Georgia, it's challenging. And one of my passions and one of my real worries, and this is not a new topic for SIEPR, is the status of secondary education in this country and the pipeline of engineers that we are turning out. And the fact of the matter is we need more H-1B visas. Because what is true is that if we are not allowed to hire the most talented foreign-born nationals who've gone to MIT or Caltech or Stanford or Berkeley or Boise State or whatever, because they have got to go home because we don't have enough visas for them, we are going to hire those people, but we're not going to hire them in the United States of America. And what is so true is that one incredibly talented engineer, I like to say, comes with 5 friends. They come with some junior engineers who might be much junior coming out of college or you know, in an internship. They come with a couple of, you know, maybe a finance person who has to, you know, organize the R&D efforts, comes with secretaries. And so my view is if we are not allowed to hire that one engineer here, we'll hire them someplace else, and they will come with 5 friends in another location. So I have to say, I think our immigration policy and strategy in America is very seriously broken, and it is disadvantaging companies that are based on engineering and science, whether it's Gilead or HP or Facebook or, you know, Merck or whatever. And I worry about this terribly. And if you look also, the other big worry I have is the high school graduation rates in this country. You know, we're about 75% of the folks graduate from high school, but if you look at a state like California, the Latino graduation rate is about 55%. And the demographics are changing so rapidly that if we don't beef up our secondary K through 12 education system here, this state is going to look very different 20 years ago, and it will not advantage the tremendous ecosystem that is here in the Bay Area. And since I suspect most of you live in the Bay Area, we live in a bubble here. Let me be really clear about this. You drive 60 miles to the east into the Central Valley or into the North State in Humboldt County or the Central Coast, the economy, which is very robust here, thank you to Gilead and others, and the incredible technology community, it's not like that everywhere else. And so the prosperity that we see here and the educational attainment that we see in many parts of Silicon Valley, this is not the norm. And it was tremendously helpful to me when I ran for governor to see the entire state. Because if you think this is how it is in the rest of California, you would be sadly mistaken.
John, how about the skills mismatch at Gilead? Or how does it affect you?
Yeah, I can just add a few points to what Meg has said. First off, in the CHI report, they mentioned that there's 270,000 people engaged in biomedical research in California. 14% of that is academic. The rest is private sector. The employment has gone down over the last 3 years, about 2.5% in that sector. So it's still very robust and very important. Also, interestingly enough, the median income for someone that's biopharmaceutical is $108,000. So we're talking about really high-paying jobs in the economy. In general, because of the reputation of our company and how small it is, we're able to recruit people, and also we recruit a lot of people who are mid-career. And our industry, if it's not in the Bay Area, is typically in other fairly expensive places to live. And so that we're recruiting people that already are aware of what it'd be like to live on the peninsula or in the East Bay. In terms of our employees at PhD or MD level, which we have a lot, 1/3 are foreign-born. Yeah. So that's not a minor number, and it's really adds a lot to the innovation at the company. And a lot of our most important innovations, for instance, some of you may know this, Gilead discovered and developed Tamiflu, which is the #1 selling drug for influenza. Almost everyone involved in the discovery of that was foreign-born.
We heard in the previous session, and I think we all kind of know that comprehensive tax reform might be on the horizon, hopefully on the horizon. But I was going to particularly concentrate on the corporate tax and perhaps this issue of whether the corporate tax should be based on worldwide profits or territorial profits, and the whole issue about repatriating foreign profits. American companies have literally trillions, maybe it's a couple, but of dollars of profits that they're not bringing home right now. And anyway, Meg, I'll start with you. Is this a problem for HP, and does HP have a position on repatriation of foreign profits?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we are on the side of virtually every major company in America, which is that we need to we need to have a moratorium, if you will, on taxing these cash flows that we have outside the United States. This would actually cause us to make more investments in the United States. And the criticism, of course, is the last time this happened, many of those monies were brought back and sent back out to people in the form of dividends. Well, I actually think that's an investment as well, and not the worst thing that could happen to the United States of America. So we're very interested in that. We also think that we've got to move to a competitive territorial tax system comparable to the UK or Japan, that we are disadvantaged in the United States. We've got to pay tax in the current country of revenue origin, and we can't have, as I said, this double taxation for repatriation. We're also, as I'm sure Gilead is, in favor of a permanent R&D tax credit. And listen, I'm in favor of doing an overhaul of the entire tax system, but until we're ready to start from ground zero, knowing what we know now, how would we design a tax system that makes the United States more competitive than any other? I think one of the things that we're hanging on to here is this R&D tax credit, which I think we would be very well suited to make that permanent, to give people the confidence that it is a good thing to invest in R&D in the United States of America. And remember what I said before, that uncertainty is not our friend here. This kind of uncertainty is not a friend of big, big companies like an HP, because the fact of the matter is we are not as nimble as, when I ran eBay. Running a $129 billion company with 5 major lines of business, you don't turn as fast as you did when I was running eBay at $400 million. So this confidence, this real sort of certainty about what the tax and regulations are going to be, I think is actually an enormous effect. And I don't think I understood that as well until I came to HP, because I was used to being able to turn pretty fast with a little PT boat at $8 billion eBay. This is a whole nother thing. And so I would just argue, listen, let's get organized about this. Let's make the decisions, and then we can make decisions that I actually think will help the United States of America.
I don't know if you want to comment on that one, John, but I actually have another one for you, so if you want, we can go to the next one.
Well, I can say I agree, and I mentioned Nick Moore, the chair of our audit committee earlier. Anyone that doesn't know him should talk to him on the break or at lunch, because he's a genius on all this stuff and has really helped guide us through a lot of these challenging issues about how to utilize offshore funds.
Well, the other thing we heard at the previous session was the long-run budget problem is a health care problem. And we enacted the Affordable Care Act in 2010, although we didn't really implement it. It's about to be implemented in 2013 and 14, maybe. But I just thought, you're in the health business. What's it look like from your vantage point, the Affordable Care Act?
Well, parts of it are implemented, right? The excise tax, we'll probably pay somewhere between $50 and $100 million in additional tax just on that. So some of the funding's front-end implemented on it. So that's an additional aspect on the business. There are pros and cons that it depends on how it plays out, and I don't think anyone really knows how it's going to play out. We have an interesting aspect of our business is the federal government supports states, and states put in some level of funding for themselves to provide AIDS medications for people who do not have insurance and are not eligible for any other type of government program. And that's called the Ryan White program. It was introduced by Ted Kennedy in 1990. It was initially mainly services. Remember, it was a death sentence in 1990. But as the better products came along, it's moved more and more to a medical care, a treatment program. And that allows everyone to be covered in some form or fashion in the United States. So we've had healthcare reform in the HIV area for a couple decades now, and it's worked out pretty well.
I'm going to start with you on this one, John, because Meg has touched on it. I'll get her view again. Both of your companies do business lots of places. Mm-hmm. Is it tougher to do business in California than elsewhere in the United States or elsewhere in the world?
There's more regulations here. For instance, California is the only state that has a duplicate of the FDA that inspects our manufacturing facilities, and that's not really necessary. So there's some level of bureaucratic stuff involved in the state. But I mentioned before we don't have really that much trouble recruiting people to here. But I can tell you when our senior people retire, they invariably move out of the state because of the tax for tax reasons to be in another part of the country.
So noted. Meg.
So listen, I have stepped out of the political sphere here, but I will say, we do business in probably 6 or 8 states in the United States with very significant population centers. As I said, Dallas, Texas, Herndon, Virginia, Alpharetta, Georgia, Boise, Idaho, Corvallis, Oregon, Vancouver, Washington. And there's no question that it is more costly to do business here, whether it is the litigation climate, which for a company our size is very damaging. It is easier to sue here, more people sue here, and that's damaging. Second, it's high cost. There's no question about it. And so this makes it challenging, and the regulatory burden here is different and more significant than it is in other states. And it is why you see over time when companies expand, they tend to expand in other states or other parts of the world. And so I think this is something that still needs to be addressed here, which is we are still the cradle of innovation in many ways, whether it was in the early days, Genzyme or, eBay, Yahoo, Google, Gilead. I mean, there's tremendous innovation here. But companies do, I think the data will tell you that companies get to a certain scale, and every new employee is in Arizona or Colorado or Texas or someplace else, or, even more detrimental to the United States of America, overseas. So I still think there's tremendous things that need to be done to try to build back California's competitiveness, and it will not be easy. There's lots of headwinds to do that, but I think it's essential as we think long term, as Californians. And gosh, it is a great place to live. I mean, look at this. I mean, the weather here is better than any place else in the world. It is a hotbed of innovation, hotbed of forward-looking thinking, fantastic educational institutions, at the undergraduate and graduate school level. So there's lots to recommend California. If we could, make some changes that would, I think, help businesses stay here, it would be great for the overall economy.
Let me just add a comment on what John said about the senior executives of Gilead. When they retire, they leave California. Tax issues for the United States are different than the tax issues for California. I don't think a lot of Americans are going to leave the United States if the Bush tax cuts expire. I really don't believe that. But California is already the high tax state in the neighborhood, compared to Nevada, compared to Oregon, compared to Washington. So we cannot take for granted that the taxpayers are going to stay put as we change our taxes in California. And I think it's an issue that might be in the air this year. I'll just leave it at that. But I think it's a concern when high-income people say, I'm getting out of here. And so I feel differently about California's taxes than I do what we should necessarily do with the United States taxes. Let me warn the audience that your turn is coming up, because I've only got one more question, and don't disappoint me. I want some curveball questions, or at least maybe softball questions or hardball. I don't care what pitch you want to throw. I was just going to ask the two of you, because I think all big companies have this issue, is can a big company with 320,000 employees, or for that matter, 4,500 employees, innovate? Or are a lot of the big innovations taking place at the halls of Stanford or in somebody's garage, and you just got to acquire that innovation? Can you be innovative and big at the same time? Meg, we'll start with you.
So the answer to that is yes, but in the way I think about it, there's two kinds of innovation. There's what I call evolutionary innovation, which is what every business has to do to keep their product competitive. And by the way, in technology, that evolutionary innovation, and probably in science, moves faster than the evolutionary innovation in consumer packaged goods or other areas. And so every company, whether you are a little company or a big company, has got to do evolutionary innovation incredibly well. That is R&D money, that is tone from the top, that is the right people in the right job with the right ring fence around R&D. Then there is what I would call revolutionary innovation. Revolutionary innovation is where whole new markets are created, completely new standards are set, and almost every company in Silicon Valley started with revolutionary innovation. So the question is, when you get to scale, how much revolutionary innovation can there be? And this is where I think, at HP at least, we can do a lot better job of incentivizing and encouraging revolutionary innovations at HP Labs and other parts of our company. But we will always have to keep an eye out for those acquisitions that just come up with things that may never be sort of sprouted in the confines of an HP. Now, by the way, I think we've veered too much to the side of acquiring revolutionary innovation at HP. I'd like to bring back the organic nature of that innovation. But I think you've always got to be on the lookout because, you know what, these young entrepreneurs, there's something very special about founders and entrepreneurs. They do things because they are incredibly passionate. They don't know any better. I mean, Pierre Omidyar, the founder of eBay, used to say, if I had listened to the lawyers, I never would have founded eBay. And Peter Thiel, who founded PayPal that eBay later bought, one of the great all-time companies, said, I didn't know banking fraud could kill you. So there's just these things that they're passionate, they don't know what could kill them, and so therefore they do things that often adults actually don't do. So so my view is you've got to constantly be on the lookout, and particularly in the areas that our companies are both in.
John, you want to add anything?
Yeah, that's well said. Revolutionary innovation is the key to coming up with drugs to treat unmet medical needs. After all, whatever we think about as an unmet medical need doesn't exist now. And that type of innovation occurs in unpredictable ways. And so as a company, you need to have really good science internally and be very opportunistic and have a lot more agility than your competitors, or you'll end up with a competitor. Examples of what we're working on now, we've talked about HIV, which afflicts 30 million people in the world. Viral liver disease is an order of magnitude higher. There's 170 million people infected with hepatitis C and 300 million with hepatitis B, and that's not being adequately addressed. A significant percentage of people go on to have either liver failure or liver cancer in both cases. So, for instance, there's about 1.2 million people in the United States with HIV, 2 million with hepatitis B, and 3 to 5 million with hepatitis C. 2020, half the people with hepatitis C are going to have cirrhosis of the liver because most were infected prior to the testing of the blood starting around 1992. So this is a really huge opportunity for us, and it's where, in both areas, we feel like we have the leadership role in the world. I gave you the U.S. numbers. The China numbers are close to 100 million with hepatitis B. And it's estimated, we don't even know for sure, no one knows for sure, but 10 to 40 million is probably on the higher number of hepatitis C in China. And what we're going to see for hepatitis C over the next few years is the evolution of therapies, and it probably different in different parts of the world because different parts of the world are infected with different strains. But we'll take something that is very inadequately treated or not at all treated now to something that can be treated with a 3 to 6 month course of therapy. And so that's, in the whole pharmaceutical field, that's where right now there's the greatest competition because the science is evolving rapidly and the medical opportunity is so enormous and so important. And just this way example, so we've been doing acquisitions in that space plus bringing forward internal compounds.
Okay, we're going to the bullpen. You're up. To mix baseball metaphors. Over here on the far side.
Mr. Martin, I was taken with your observation that the pharmaceuticals component of healthcare is 12 or 6, depending upon generics. But this morning we heard people talking about the threat to our culture of increasing healthcare costs. Can you step outside just the pharmaceuticals and talk about the other 96% of the problem, 94% of the problem? As you see it, what are the things we could do as a culture to tackle this problem?
Well, yeah, I was interested. The people that talked this morning have much more expertise broadly on those types of systems than I do. And I was interested in the way the discussion was about we don't really know. It would seem like to me the current system would eventually go the way a lot of other countries have, and you end up rationing when there's no limit on what you don't pay for it, you can get whatever you want. At some point that's going to lead to rationing if it hasn't in some countries and in some ways already.
One thing that Laura Tyson said was that the growth in spending per patient on Medicare was very similar to the growth in spending in the privately insured population. In fact, she may have said the privately insured had grown a little more. The lesson I took from that is that if you're spending other people's money, then you're not going to control growth. And, the insurance company's money is other people's money, and the Medicare's money is other people's money. I think if you were to look at medical procedures which are typically not insured, plastic surgery, LASIK eye surgery, you'd find that there's been more control of costs and more innovation on cost reduction than there's been on the stuff when you're spending other people's money. That's what I took.
The other thing that companies have to look at, and I was inspired by Steve Bird at Safeway, who put in place a financial incentive for his employees to bring down 3 major indices. One was BMI, how overweight or not you are, blood pressure, which I think is indicative for a whole host of other diseases, as well as, I can't remember what the third one was, but it was quite simple, 3 measures. And Smoking, thank you. And at first, there was tremendous pushback by his employees, because basically they paid a certain amount for their copay for their insurance. And basically what he did is he backed it off. So if you were going to pay $1,600 a year for your insurance at Safeway, if you reduced one risk factor, you went from $1,600 to $1,200 to $800 to $400. And so it was a pretty significant financial incentive. And at first there was tremendous pushback. But then, not surprisingly, people responded to financial incentives. And they kept a chart in the lobby of Safeway, which was how many collective pounds Safeway employees had lost, the collective reduction in blood pressure. And it was incredibly effective. And there were 2 benefits. One is, and I wish Steve was here because I'm not sure I'm quoting the exact numbers, but effectively for the last 5 years, his healthcare insurance cost for his company has been flat, which is quite remarkable. And by the way, everyone feels better, right? I mean, the employee population is healthier, and they feel great about themselves. So this has been, quite a success story. And, he actually tried to get the federal government. He went to the federal government and said, you've got 400,000 federal employees. How about you put them on this sort of Safeway notion of health care? And that was rejected out of hand. But the fact of the matter is, listen, we're looking at something like this because we have, as I said, 320,000 employees. We've got a big enough population where this could actually make a meaningful difference to both the health and welfare of our employees, plus the bottom line. So these are the kinds of things. I agree that there's no silver bullet here. My experience is on really tough problems, there's never a silver bullet, right? These are, set them up, knock them down, set them up, knock them down. So something like this, I think, I'm surprised it has not gotten more traction around the world.
Yes, Henry. This is Henry Aaron.
Mr. Martin, it's probably the case that drug development holds a greater potential for improving the quality of life of humanity than almost anything else we can think of. Yet you noted correctly that the flow of new drugs has fallen off the table in recent years at the very same time that the technology for trying out new drugs has advanced an order of magnitude at least. Mm-hmm. What is your explanation for what's gone wrong, and what is your prescription for how to change the flow?
Yeah, I don't know if something's gone wrong. As we've evolved over time, we're going after more and more complicated types of problems. You may have saw that, and it's not a surprising observation, just this week, where this idea that you can sequence someone's cancer gene, or the gene that's causing the cancer. First off, we know it's not one gene. It's multiple genes, maybe 10 or 12 before you have an aggressive cancer. The other thing that came out this week is, depending upon where you sequence, just where you get the tissue from a single tumor, you'll get maybe different sequences. So there's a lot of heterogeneity. We see it in our R&D programs all the time. It goes back to the first comment you made, Meg, is you can't get too upset or too excited. As soon as you think you have something good, it's going to turn around and not be so good. There's a real back and forth of drug discovery and development. Most compounds that are made in the lab lack activity and never even tested in animal models or in tissue cultures. Others, most drugs that go into human clinical trials fail in human clinical trials. It's an extraordinarily expensive undertaking. It takes lots of years. And it takes a team of really smart people working together. You have to have professional athletes who have been through this. It takes about a decade before someone actually has the ability to contribute in a meaningful way to an overall program, simply because of the scientific complexity and diversity in any one of the challenges we undertake. There is, John and I were talking about it earlier, a fall off in productivity of the larger pharmaceutical companies. And I'm not an expert on why that's there. People talk about it a lot. But from my point of view, it's better to be a smaller, keep your R&D organization smaller, and to ensure collaborative processes. If you work in a big pharmaceutical company as a scientist like I once did, you get to go to one scientific conference a year, so you don't really get to interact with the outside world. We have a much smaller number of people, and we really, frankly, don't care if they go to a number of scientific conferences every year, because we want that interaction with the outside world, the knowledge. And having that type of diversity is really important. Our biggest AIDS drug came out of a collaboration that we had with a group in Prague in the Czech Republic and Leuven in Belgium. And so thinking about having a collaboration like that across countries and across different types of scientists is really the only way to pull all this together.
Yes, on the far side.
Meg, excuse me. Meg, you spoke about the bubble we live in here, and obviously there's tremendous economic vitality here. Is there any scenario under which what's going on here can have a profound impact on the rest, or a broad impact on the rest of the country? Or is there something about what's going on here that even is more limited in its economic impact than prior eras? If Facebook doesn't need Corvallis or Idaho or the kind of manufacturing and bigger operations that prior generations of Valley companies have had.
Yeah. So listen, what is going on? I mean, Silicon Valley is one of those most remarkable and special places on the planet. And frankly, Silicon Valley right now is keeping the California economy alive. I mean, afloat in many ways. You look at what's going on with the California state budget. Part of the reason we may be able to bring down this budget deficit is the IPOs of Facebook, LinkedIn, and others that are going to put a lot of money into California coffers. And remember, one Facebook IPO has huge, gigantic ripple effects, whether it be on housing or services or any number of other things. So what other states try to do is to create an equivalent of this ecosystem. And it's very hard to do because it is almost an alchemy, isn't it? It is an alchemy between Stanford, Berkeley. In many ways, many Silicon Valley companies trace their heritage to HP, which is one of the reasons that I agreed to come on board to try to turn the company around, because it actually matters what happens to the grandfathers and grandmothers of Silicon Valley. And it's fascinating because it is this alchemy, this ecosystem that's very hard to replicate. And everyone's trying to do it, whether it's, Austin, Texas. Frankly, 128 outside of Massachusetts has lost some of that, alchemy and ecosystem. So everyone is trying to create it. Once you got it, you've got to make sure you don't lose it, because these are really hard to create and they take a long time and they're hard to undo. So I think there are some lessons learned. But I will tell you, every governor of every other state in the country has watched what's going on here, and many of them have tried to replicate it, and it is not easy. So I would just say, listen, it is a gem. Silicon Valley, where we live, is a gem of California. It's a gem of the United States, but it is not easily replicable, which is why I think we've got to sort of put some things that are in place that can help manufacturing thrive throughout the United States, that can help our education system rebuild. Because I think sort of saying, let's just do more Silicon Valleys, it's not realistic. It's when people say, well, why don't you just be like Apple? Okay, that's actually really hard to do. And as I said, I admire Apple tremendously. But Apple isn't the everyday occurrence here, just like Silicon Valley is not the everyday occurrence. And I think we need to rejoice and celebrate and understand what we have here and protect it with everything that we possibly can.
Okay. What do we have? Right here. Mike is coming.
Oh, boy. Slow.
With difficulty.
With difficulty.
I'd be interested to hear your perspectives on the competitiveness of the U.S. economy, both in terms of your companies, but also just generally when you think about China today and maybe thinking back to the way we thought about Japan in the 1980s.
Sure.
In terms of the major predictors, whether it's education, government support, government policy, et cetera.
It's John's turn. I just spoke, so you go first.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So no other, just like what we talked about, Silicon Valley and what's going on in biotech here, there are other biotech hubs in the United States that are very strong. No other country has it to the same degree. They haven't invested into research. Their pharmaceutical industries have stagnated because of a lot of the way the governments control their products. So it's much, much stronger in the United States than any other country. As I've said before, a lot of our top scientists are from other countries because we do provide the opportunity here for that. Our long development times and the need for so many different types of disciplines to work together also protects the United States from being able to be the leading innovator in biomedical research. Other countries are investing a lot. I just came back from China. And we invest in China too, but it doesn't come close to what the capabilities are here in the United States.
So I would say, listen, I think America is the greatest country in the world. We still have enormous competitive advantages, but it's very clear to me we are losing our competitive advantage versus other countries. And I just in preparation for this, I read the Kauffman Foundation report that was titled "Losing the World's Best and Brightest: America's New Immigrant Entrepreneurs." And what's fascinating is very few foreign students that are educated in the United States plan to stay here permanently. Only 6% of Indian students who are educated in the United States, 10% of Chinese, and 15% of European students. And I think what you're seeing is students fear that they're not going to be able to find the jobs, they're not going to be able to get the work visas, and they think that the U.S. economy is going to lag behind the average GDP growth of their home countries. And this is in remarkably sharp contrast to the 80s and the 90s, where the majority of skilled immigrants only wanted to stay here. 80% of the kids wanted to stay here because they thought the best opportunities for a great career and growth was going to be here. So I think the evidence is that we are losing ground. And listen, there are still, as I said, tremendous advantages here. But I worry terribly about our loss of manufacturing. Part of what's happened here is that we have gutted middle-class opportunities by having lost 1/3 of our manufacturing capacity in the United States and in California over the last 5 to 10 years. And I don't think we can sit around and say that that is okay. And maybe textile manufacturing and some of the low value-add manufacturing will never come back. but we have got to hang on to skilled manufacturing in this country. Because many people will say, oh, don't worry about it, we'll just do all the innovation and the manufacturing will be done someplace else. I don't believe that, because there is an interplay between the discovery and the iteration around a new product or a new drug or new whatever, that if you're near that manufacturing line, there is a synergy there that we are now losing. And I'll tell you a little story that I read in a book called Make It in America by Andrew Liveris. And Amazon, when they were going to do the Kindle, one of the things they wanted was ink that you could read in bright sunlight. You could take your Kindle to the beach or by a pool and you could read in bright sunlight. They looked all over to find ink that would allow them to build a Kindle with that specification, and they found a company in Massachusetts called E-Ink. Then they went to find LCD manufacturers. The last LCD manufacturer left the United States 4 or 5 years ago. The best LCD manufacturer they could find for this was in Taiwan. And for a while, they put E-Ink together with the Taiwanese manufacturer to do this iteration about how you could create this screen with E-Ink that you could read in the sunlight. And finally, the Taiwanese said, you know what, we can't do this. We've got to have the ink guys right here. And they turned around and they bought E-Ink and moved it to Taipei. This is not good for the United States of America. And so my view is that this notion that we can separate innovation from manufacturing, I think is wrong-headed. And we've got to think through how we can create a manufacturing policy, an economic policy, a tax rate that encourages manufacturing, particularly the advanced manufacturing, to stay in this state, frankly, and in this country, because I just don't subscribe to the notion that these two will ultimately, we'll own in all the innovation, don't worry about it. And by the way, where are the vast majority of folks? You know, the great thing about America is you could have a high school education and, you know, just 10 or 15 years ago, get a great job, you know, that you could support your family on at Ford Motor Company or Caterpillar or whatever. If we don't solve this problem, I'm not sure we can change our educational system fast enough to create the kind of skills that can go be a scientist at Gilead. It's simply not going to be the case. So I worry about this terribly, and think we got to really focus on this.
So this question, I'm not going to have my answer to it, but I would just mention that it links to the lunch talk of the skills mismatch. So we'll be talking about this in an hour or so. Let's have some more questions if we have them. Am I missing?
Yeah. There's one way back there, the woman in a red.
Got it, right here.
A couple hands there, too.
Whoever's got the mic, just pick one out.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The lights are more or less shining here, so I have to...
Sorry. So I'm coming with a perspective of a venture capitalist, early stage. And my question is two parts for the big company executives we have here. Thought one is, since 25% of U.S. jobs added to the economy and most of the high-paid jobs came from startup companies after they went public, what should we be doing to make the IPO process for little companies, 100 million in sales or less, easier? The thought one. And thought two, shouldn't we distinguish the plan to tax carried interest for hedge fund managers, PE managers, and venture capitalists, distinguished, since one set of those people create jobs and the other two sets ship jobs overseas? Thank you.
I'll start. So since like 3/4 of the people in the room are venture capitalists. So
that was a knuckleball.
So, you know, I have only taken one company public, and that was eBay, you know, back in 1998. And maybe the venture capitalists in the room have a different point of view. I'm not sure that we should make the process any easier to be a public company. I mean, listen, it does matter that there's real revenues, that revenues are greater than costs for the most part. I mean, I don't think we've suspended the general laws of business here. And I think what you saw in the internet bubble, which was that almost any company could get public on the basis of eyeballs as opposed to the basis of real revenues and real products. So my view is, I don't think it's that hard to get public if you are a good company that has put together a track record. And by the way, I'm in favor of track records here. I mean, 2 years does not put together a great company. And so my view is I'm not sure I'd be thinking about how to make the process easier, but I suspect there will be many here who would disagree. I wouldn't worry about that. With regard to carried interest, you know, I am not in favor at the moment of raising taxes on anyone. My view is that we should streamline and reform the entire tax system in America because it's one of those things where you really actually, and politically this may not be possible, but this is where you really want to zero base the whole thing, where you want to say that holy grail of, okay, if we knew everything that we knew now when we were writing the tax code and we could start afresh, what would we do? And it's clear it would be very different than the situation in which we have because of the complexity of the tax system that we have, I don't think is in the best interest of the United States of America. But before we start tweaking any individual tax rates up, I'd like to say, you know, let's zero base this thing and let's put together a tax structure that makes sense given everything that we know. If you did that, then you could step all the way back and say, does carried interest, you know, make sense being taxed at a different rate than ordinary income? You know, I don't know the answer to that because I got to pull the lens back and say, how does this work across the broad base? And I think the way we've gotten ourselves into trouble, and you know, George Shultz and others who have served in government could tell us, I think it is this incremental approach. Okay, and politicians love, here's a problem, let's go solve that problem. Here's another problem, let's go solve that problem. Here's another problem, let's go solve that problem, as opposed to understanding the complete ramifications and the law of unintended consequences here. And I think of our tax code as a bit like the Winchester Mystery House down in San Jose, which is that we've added on room after room after room, and some of the doors open and they go nowhere. And so my view is at this juncture we have a gigantic Winchester Mystery House that needs to be leveled, and we need to build a more secure house for the 21st century.
All right. One of the graphs in your book has a word count of various documents, like the U.S. Constitution, like the Affordable Care Act, and so forth. The longest bar on that bar graph is the U.S. tax code. It makes the Bible look like a short story. It could deal with a little streamlining. Do we have another?
The woman right way in the back, woman in red.
The woman in red. That's you always got to call on the woman in red.
Thank you. I have a question for Meg about innovation at HP. I spent 10 years at the company, mostly under Carly, and my experience was that innovation wasn't so hard. The hard part within the context of a company like HP was around commercializing that innovation, and I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah. I'd say right now at HP we have a combination of challenges in that regard. First of all, the R&D monies has been lower than I think is healthy for at least the 4 or 5, 6 years. And again, as I said, money is a necessary but not sufficient condition. I think we are below necessary levels at this company. And by the way, there's many talented engineers. Because we are, for the most part, an enterprise company, if you are a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer, we are one of the great places to be. And so there's a lot of innovation there, but we have starved it. And so the first thing we've got to do is we've got to put more money in, we've got to get more people working on more focused products. And then I agree, there is always that, you know, you've got to make sure that and you must see this every day, how do you get from lab to enterprise customer as fast as you possibly can? And I would say that actually the innovation, the R&D that takes place in our business units, we're not bad at commercializing that. I would say we've got some work to do to commercialize from HP labs to the business units to the end user customer. So my view at this juncture is the innovation that's going on in our business units, they're pretty good at commercializing what they do. HP Labs, I think we've got some challenges. Now, I also have to say, you know, HP Labs is designed to have innovation that is 8, 10 years down the road. So if you force too much commercialization in that, sometimes you lose the joy of discovery and the innovation. But I think, you know, we can do some work there. As I said, HP has had these siloed business units for many, many years. And I spent, after my first month, I spent a day at HP Labs. And at the end of the day, I said, I have found the 6th silo at HP. They sit up on the hill, and they do not have nearly the integration with the business units that they need to have. And so that's one thing that we're working on. And back to this notion of symbolic value. So HP Labs had not reported directly to the CEO for many, many years. And one of the first things I did is I said, I'm going to take HP Labs as a direct report to me. What I know about memristors, we could count on my little finger. But the symbolic value of HP Labs and the innovation engine longer term of HP reporting to the CEO was worth so much. I mean, you could just see the step, the joy in people's step up there. The fact that I'm up there once a month for a brief, I bring the entire EC. We're making those connections, and that tiny little step of tone from the top, I think, is actually going to have a disproportionate impact on the company. We'll see. Thank you for the question.
So this mic is right here on my tie, and I'm living in fear that my stomach's going to growl. So I think we want to thank Meg and John, and Steve's going to come up and tell us what we do next.